What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikaPikaPapa, and these are the kinds of videos that I really enjoy doing. And actually, they're what I think kind of separates the PikaPikaPapa channel from others. And what we're going to do today is we're going to be looking at a video that we did a while ago, and we're going to do an update. We're going to say, hey, listen, we had this type of hypothesis. How are things performing so far? We still know we need more time to pass before we can put any definitive truths to it, but we're going to talk about it. This video I'm referencing happened in March, and obviously we're doing an update here in August, so a lot of time has passed, and I think this is really important. I think you have to do that because the way we level up our collecting and investing skills is by seeing how things perform over time, and then we can take the way things have performed over time, we can add them to things that are happening in the present. It might give us some idea of how things will perform in the future. There's no guarantees, nobody has a crystal ball, but I always like to take lessons from the past, apply them to the present, and hopefully give me some idea what will happen in the future. So what we did in the past was we did a comparison to Sword and Shield chase cards versus Sun and Moon chase cards. Now, you have to realize those are two very different eras and two very different collecting environments, right? Sun and Moon kind of was what it was, but then Sword and Shield happened right in the middle of the pandemic, and we saw the pandemic pump in Pokemon. A bunch of people came flooding back into the hobby, and Sword and Shield was wildly popular. You know, you add that with the fact that the alt arts were great, and you had trainer gallery cards that were super popular. Evolving Skies was this massive set, so there's all kinds of things in Sword and Shield. So when we compare the two, you have to remember that because a lot of the numbers we're going to look at are really different. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to understand is, hey, listen, is Sword and Shield going to be able to outperform other sets in the future? Because guess what? Sword and Shield, when we look at population report, there is a whole lot of PSA 10 cards in these awesome chase sets. So we will have to see how that all shakes out. But the point of this video is to do a look back, to do a refresher, and at least see how all of these chase cards are performing right now and see what kind of lessons we can take away. So hey, listen, if that type of stuff gets you excited, obviously we are a data-heavy channel. We're always trying to take lessons from the past. We're always trying to learn from them. We're always trying to apply them to the future. And if that gets you excited and you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. We got an amazing community. I would love for you to be a part of it. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up. And if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. So, as I said, remember, we're going to look at some population reports, but that is such a small sliver of the pie, right? Like, population is one thing, demand is the other. You can have the coolest Gengar card in the world. I'm a huge Gengar fan. You can have a population of 20 and a PSA 10 Gem Mint holder, but unless there is way more than 20 people out there who want the card, the value isn't going to follow the rarity. So remember that. Even though some of these cards have really low pop, the demand has to be there for the price to go up. So with that being said, let's kind of ground ourselves in where we are from the Sword and Shield perspective before we get a deep dive into the Sun and Moon. So this is it. These are all of the PSA 10 numbers for the Sword and Shield block as it is right now, their current population numbers, their current prices, and all of that good stuff. So we'll start off just by looking at average population. So when you look at these 20 chase cards from the Sword and Shield era, the average PSA 10 population for all of those cards is about 7,500. However, we do have two cards that really skew that average upwards. That's the Celebrations Charizard, and that's the Charizard from Shining Fates, because those have almost 20,000 in PSA 10 holders. So I went ahead and pulled those out just to give us a more, basic frame of reference here. And you will see that with those two pulled out, the average PSA 10 population is still over 6,000. It's at 6,169. And to be honest with you, that population is growing every single day. Now, the price, on the other hand, is in a different story. Now, the price is still relatively approachable compared to what you're going to see in Sun and Moon, and one would expect that because the populations are going to be so much bigger. So the average price for those cards is $348. But again, as we all know, the Moonbreon's driving that price up, so I did the same thing, pulled the Moonbreon out, and the average price of the other 19 is $302. So when you think about that, hey, listen, higher populations and a bit of a lower price when it comes to the average price for these PSA 10 cards. Now, of course, we're going to look at Sun and Moon, and that's what we're really going to focus on for the rest of this video. So here are the populations for Sun and Moon cards back in March of 2024, okay? And you will see that the average PSA 10 population for those cards was 1,060, 86% lower than we saw in the Sword and Shield block, right? But again, different eras, different times, so take that with a grain of salt, but it is a very interesting jumping off point that the average population for these is so much lower. Now, if you pull the statistical outlier from a population perspective out of this data set, so if you pull out the Charizard GX from Hidden Fates, which has a pop of 6,305, the average PSA 10 population drops by about 20-something%, right? The average population goes from 1,060 all the way down to 784 for the other 19 cards in there. That is a huge drop, and that is a very relevant data point right there. Now, As I told you, from Sword and Shield to Sun and Moon, we see the price go up. Populations go down, prices go up, so that makes a lot of sense. The average price, including all of the 20 cards for the top 10 cards here, or excuse me, the top 20 cards in the Sun and Moon set is $593. However, we do have that Charizard GX at the very top from Burning Shadows. Stunner of a card, really hard card to get in a PSA 10 gem mint, has a 17% gem rate. That card goes for $2,300. So if you pull that one card out, the average price for the other 19 drops down to $501. Now that is still much, much higher than the Sword and Shield cards, but again, these are much rarer. And the other thing that's interesting, and we'll talk about this more throughout the video, is I have that column in the middle there that's highlighted in colors. That is the PSA 10 gem rate, and you will see that the gem rate for these cards, the high is 59, the low is 17%, and a lot of these are in the mid-high 40 range. So compared to Sword and Shield, where Sword and Shield, the alt art chase cards, the gem rate there is in the 60s, 65, 70 range. Actually, the Moonbryon has a gem mint 10 rate of 72%. So there's still going to be a lot more Sword and Shield to be ripped. There's going to be more added to that overall population. And sure, there's going to be more Sun and Moon that's going to be ripped, but at least we have these lower gem rates to kind of offset how much. Less is going to be opened with worse gem rates. So one would expect the overall PSA 10 population to grow slower over time versus the Sword and Shield. Now, we're going to double click into that right here. So this is Sun and Moon Poppy information from March all the way to August. Now, I thought this was interesting. I looked at the overall PSA 10 population growth for all of the cards. I aggregated together, and their population went up almost 11%, 10.88%. Now, Sword and Shield's overall population went up 22%. It went up about double. But when you look at, forget about the percentage, look at just the number of cards that were added, because Sun and Moon was jumping off from, remember, the average number of cards in a PSA 10 holder for all of these, including all 20, was 1,000, right? The total number of PSA 10 cards that were added to this pool for Sun and Moon was 1,988. And remember how I talked about Sword and Shield cards are getting added left and right? There was over 26,000 of those Sword and Shield chase cards in a PSA 10 gem mint holder that were added to the overall population from March until August. Now, there's going to be more. It's not a big deal. Again, Sword and Shield is wildly popular. The demand is through the roof, so it's going to hold strong prices. But I'm trying to think about, how is that going to play way down into the road? Like, how long are people going to be fired up about Sword and Shield? Maybe forever. Maybe it's one of the greatest sets in recent memory. It certainly has all of the intangibles going for it, from the alt arts to the trainer galleries to the pandemic pump. Like, it certainly could be, but it's something I'm keeping top of mind as I look at this, as we go down this, kind of rabbit hole of considering these two different eras and their chase cards. Now, average price growth, I did that as well. And as I said, Sword and Shield has a very strong price growth from March until now. The average Sword and Shield card is up 32% versus where it jumped off in March. But remember, it is starting to come down a little bit, right? We're going to have to see, where those cards start to settle. But the average price growth for Sun and Moon chase cards was up 11%. That's nothing to shake a fist at. That's a solid growth from March until August. Again, a lot of people will take 8%, 9% returns in the stock market over the course of a year, and they'll just consider that the bee's knees, right? That's kicking butt and taking names. So here, over a lesser period of time, you were up 11%. I think that is really solid. Now, we had 10 cards that had the population jump greater than 10%, which I thought was interesting. You can see them, here they are. You see them in the darker red and orange colors on there. And we actually had 6 cards from the Sun and Moon chase set that are down in value versus March. Now, so far, the way it looks, listen, Sword and Shield had much better price gains over that time period than Sun and Moon. So we'll continue to watch this moving forward. And on the next couple slides, we're going to drill down into some individual cards and take a look at them and see how they performed. But so far, Sword and Shield is winning. Now, we're going to have to see what happens in the long run. Sun and Moon had a higher jumping off point, so we'll see in the long run. But as I said, so far, Sword and Shield is kicking butt and taking names in the chase of the big chase cards. Next one's right here. A tale of two different Charizards, and I thought this really illustrated the point of the whole supply and demand side of things really well, because we have two stunning Charizard cards, right? I think these are absolutely gorgeous. They look almost identical, except the fact that one comes from Hidden Fates, one comes from Burning Shadows. The Burning Shadows one is a rainbow, and obviously Hidden Fates is a shiny card, but from an illustration standpoint, they are exactly the same. But where you get to a big, big difference is the overall population, right? Now look at the Burning Shadows Charizard. there's only 820 of those in a PSA 10 holder, and as I said, the gem rate is a paltry 17%, and that card has grown by 16.7% ever since March. It is all the way up to over $2,700. It is a huge chase card commanding a huge premium. Then, when you look at the one from Hitting Fates, guess what? A PSA 10 population of 6,737. Obviously, those many cards in a PSA 10 holder is going to, depress the price a little bit. It's still not a cheap card by any stretch of the imagination, right? It's still going for $651, but what we didn't see was quite the same amount of growth, right? It is only up about 2.5% from where it was in March. So higher population, awesome card, almost the same art. I know a lot of people don't like Rainbow, but guess what? The Rainbow card is the one that outperforms, so that's a really interesting thing. So almost the exact same art, same card, and then you look at the way the different populations had effect on how the price grew over time. So again, I thought this was a really cool comparison to look at these two right out of the gate. Now, the next ones I wanted to look at are the three cards that grew the most in price. I thought that was interesting too, and what was really cool to me was obviously the Lovebirds card on here. I think that the big chase cards are having their time in the sun. Greninja from Scarlet and Violet is obviously doing well. We got the Moonbryon from Evolving Skies. That card is obviously doing really well. And then the Lovebirds card from Team Up is absolutely crushing it, okay? Relatively low PSA 10 population compared to all of the chase cards in Sword and Shield with only 1,402 of them. Now, the population did grow a decent amount, and we sometimes see that in the chase cards because people are obviously trying to get these things in their hands, and as soon as they do, they send them out and get them graded. So we saw the PSA 10 population grow by about 13%. But again, when you're talking about 1,402 cards in the total population, that's not a lot of cards to be graded and to be added in overall. Now, the price on that one grew almost 37%. But what was interesting to me was the biggest price gainer was the Mewtwo from Shining Legends, right? That card from a singles card perspective has not performed really well. It's been flat to down just a little bit over the course of the year, but if you look at it, this card from a PSA 10 perspective is all the way up at $850. This card has gone up almost 64% ever since March, which is really interesting. Now, the PSA 10% there, look at the gem rate. That is the lowest gem rate out of the three of these. It has the highest population and the lowest gem rate. So I thought that was an interesting takeaway on this Mewtwo card right here. And then of course you have Gardevoir and Sylveon, and Evolutions are just having a time in the sun right now. Like, Evolutions are just hot all over the place. So to see this Sylveon really spike in price didn't surprise me too much. Overall, a really low PSA 10 population of 856, a pretty strong growth rate in terms of the number of cards that were added to that PSA 10 population. It's up 15% versus March. But again, I think a lot of people are really excited about these cards. They went and had them graded, and now they hopefully came back in a PSA 10 for those people, and we see them added in here. And the price at $390, I mean, that is a very strong price growth or price number for this cool card from Unbroken Bond. So again, those are your three biggest gainers, and I think there's interesting parts in both of them. I think the Mewtwo has a really low PSA 10 rate, right? 27% is second lowest, only to the one we just talked about on the last page, right? The Charizard with the 17% gem rate. Then you got Lovebirds, which is the chase card of the whole era, so I think that has its own merit. And then you got the Sylveon and Gardevoir card, right? And Sylveon is obviously having its moment. All Evolutions are. So three really cool takeaways from these three cards that have the most price appreciation, ever since we launched this video series in March. So of course, we got to see the other side of the coin. Now we're going to look at the cards that were in the negative. So these are the cards that had fallen off and were actually in the negative from March until now. And I thought this was really interesting. So three of these five cards are from Cosmic Eclipse. Now, Cosmic Eclipse is a great set. It had a ton of cards, way over $100. So maybe Cosmic Eclipse just got a little too frothy. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting is three of the five cards on this list are trainers. There was some awesome trainer cards in the Sun and Moon era, and rightfully so. There was some really cool prices to go with them. The Rosa card is obviously, a very stunner of a card from the Cosmic Eclipse. And then of course, you got Lily, who's scattered throughout Sun and Moon, and then the Lisa card right here. And you've got some really cool cards in here. And what was interesting to me is the ones that were down, the Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia, right? That triple full art card from Cosmic Eclipse. It was only down 1.7%. Now, down is not good, but it certainly didn't have the bottom fall out. And then you got the Lugia, the Rainbow card from Lost Thunder. Again, down, but not down by much. So you think think about the legendary cards, right? Those legendary cards, they tended to do pretty well even though they are down. Again, flat over that period of time, nothing like Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield just saw everything appreciate in value except those 2 Charizard cards which had their population through the roof. But overall, Sword and Shield, most of those cards are up, and here we have a decent number of cards that are actually down. And then what was a big surprise to me was the Tyranitar and Sableye full art tag team card from Unified Minds. I absolutely love the artwork, but it just goes to show you that as much as you love the artwork, it can still come down in price. Now, I did a deep dive into this price. There have been a couple sales in the $220 range, but there's still plenty of them selling for $250, $260. So I went ahead and went with the price that was provided to me, but I still think this one's a little bit higher than $220. Although if you're a good sniper and a good hunter, you certainly can find this for $220. So far as we can tell, the Sword and Shield has absolutely outperformed Sun and Moon, even though Sun and Moon has a much lower population, has a much lower gem rate overall. You know, it's going to be interesting to see how Sword and Shield ages. I think it's going to do really well. I think it's going to age like fine wine, and I think it's going to help either put to bed or validate the fact that, hey, certain cards in the PSA 10 population, it can either be oversaturated, or as long as the demand is high enough, they're going to perform just fine in the long run. So, hey, listen, these are the type of videos I really enjoy. I love getting nitty-gritty into the data. I love looking at specific cards over given periods of time. I love looking at all these different factors so we can try and, get some learnings and get some takeaways. So for example, when you look at these, if you had just stayed away from trainer cards went all the way back in March, you probably would have been okay, because that's where a lot of our biggest L's came from, right? The Lisa, the Rosa, the Cynthia and Caitlyn card, that's where most of the big L's came from. So maybe you could have said, hey, listen, trainer cards are kind of coming on the other side of the moon. They're not doing too great right now. If you had focused on other Sun and Moon chase cards besides the trainer cards, I guarantee everything would have been just fine. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this type of content, if you thought it was fun, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give us a thumbs up if you had fun. And if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. I appreciate you more than I can say. You have an epic one, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye.